So when I was younger, I had a Z car I drove to college in. It got good gas and was fun, so it worked out in the end. Well, it was summer and we got transients who follow the rich tourists begging for money, free shit, or just annoy you until you give them something. Akin to tourists, they're a pest too. Often trashing campsites, used to work for parks, or just walk up and take shit. Our person we will call ET. So I was getting gas when ET walks up. She looks at me and says, "Hey, I'm waiting for the punchline when out of the blue. Can I borrow your car? I'll return it, dude. I swear. My boyfriend, dog, and I are going to a city opposite direction, and we don't have a way to get there, and you look like you own more than one car." I was a 23-year-old grossing $6,000 a year. A year! Which all funding went to gas, parts, tuition, and missed things to help me at home. This is during the last recession when gas was almost $5. Told her it's my only car and that she can wait for the bus. ET tells me the bus kicked her off with her dog and boyfriend because they're musicians in need. Told her that's a problem and I don't have money to hand out and I don't want to give my car to a stranger. She claims she's trustworthy by saying she has a license. Told her no. ET can't comprehend this. She huffs and offers me weed. Tell her I don't smoke and I'm not interested. She got really mad and got close. Listen, my boyfriend and my dog have been outside for 5 hours. And you'll be so cool if you let us borrow your car. Tell her the answer is no. She pulled her guitar out saying she is late for a show. Told her I don't care, I'm not giving her my car. Her boyfriend yells, "We are cool," as he was playing with the dog. I asked if she was high. ET began trying at the passenger door. Lucky for me, the lock was set as she kept saying, "Just let us borrow it." She walked back and pleaded loudly, "Come on, you don't need it. It'll be a few hours, dude. We need the car. Come on, we're a community." I grabbed my phone, which I realized was in my Z because I was getting scared. Pump clicked and put the cap on as ET was asking her boyfriend if he had money to offer me. She runs up and offers me her soiled panties because I look like the type, saying, "I'll go into the porta potty and pull them off for you because you look like you don't see many women." So aside from not comprehending I won't lend my car to strangers, she assumed I'm the kind of person who buys used panties. It's not my thing and it's kinda gross, unhygienic, and how skid-marked bloody underpants gonna get me a new car. Told her to go away and was gonna call the tribal police. They're close and don't take shit from people. Sadly, ET only comprehended police and she screamed, "Pig!" spitting at my car and making pig noises, because belittling people works apparently. Her boyfriend told me he hopes I wreck my car because karma hates me and I deserve it. Next day, I saw them at the side of the store doing scratchers and smoking. Next story. Years ago, I worked for a tiny, poorly managed company. It was a lot of fun. There were only 5 of us plus 2 owners and managers. We were all in one huge room in an old converted diner with a jukebox, and at random times during the day we'd stop working and play a multiplayer first-person shooter, yelling at each other across the room. The work was fun too. Overall, a great experience. The partners running the company didn't get along. One of them was a professor in charge of science and technology, but he had very poor business sense, so he didn't get involved in that part. The other was the business person and money guy. He also had very poor business sense. They had completely opposite ideas of how to run the company. The tech guy wanted to build solid technology, taking as long as it needed to create something good and worry about how to sell it later. The business guy wanted to sell something quickly as possible even if the technology was far from ready. Any trick in the book was fair game. Over time, there was less and less oversight over us lowly workers, and when there was oversight, it was inept. For a while, a 19-year-old intern who the business guy liked, who also happened to be the most arrogant person I've ever met, but that's another story, kind of took charge without anyone telling him to and made a mess of things, wasting huge amounts of everyone's time and setting our technology back months. The tech guy didn't understand our day-to-day work unless it had a mathematical formula behind it, so he just assumed the arrogant intern knew what he was doing. And any complaints brought to the business guy fell on deaf ears because he liked the kid. Despite all this, we actually made a lot of progress in creating some good technology over the years. Over time, the business guy fired the mathematicians and scientists one by one and hired more expensive people he thought could build something sellable on our nowhere near ready technology. This, of course, made us go even slower, which meant we had an even smaller chance of selling anything. After nearly a year of this tech guy got us together to brainstorm and write up an ultimatum, demanding that the business guy change the way the company was run, putting technology first. We were all young and stupid, so we went along with it. Shockingly, this didn't go over well. Maybe it was because we had no leverage at all, since we all wanted to keep our jobs. An ultimatum without consequences isn't worth much. One of the business guy's jobs was to raise money. He hired someone to do that, but that person couldn't deal with him, so he quit. None of us were told about this. A week or so after the ultimatum, 3 days before our bi-weekly payday, we were informed that the company was going out of business. We were also informed that for months the business guy had been paying us out of his own pocket and that he was withdrawing all money from the company's account, so we would not be paid for our last 2 weeks. Okay, it happens. Pretty sketchy from a legal standpoint, but what could I do? So I let it go. 2 years later, I got a letter in the mail from the company. The bankruptcy proceedings were over. I never knew they started. And the company's assets had been sold. According to the law, after the lawyers are paid along with a couple other first-tier things, any money left had to go towards delinquent paychecks. All I had to do to get my money was sign a document that would permanently waive my rights to ever sue the company for any reason. There was one problem. My paycheck was included with the letter, so I cashed the check and threw away the waiver. They wanted me to waive my legal rights for nothing. I think there's enough entitlement scattered throughout the story for this sub. If not, let me know and maybe tell me a better place to post it, since I've been sitting on this one for a long time. A little aftermath story with a touch more entitlement. Another year or so later, I got a call from the tech guy's favorite employee. The two of them were starting a new company and I just had to join. It was a great opportunity. All I had to do was move to the middle of nowhere. The nearest airport or city was an hour drive away, accept a huge pay cut, work long hours, and take a ton of extra responsibility to build a new technology that would certainly fail because no one qualified to build it lived within 50 miles. All I had to do was move to the middle of nowhere. The nearest airport city was an hour drive away, accept a huge pay cut, work long hours, and take on a ton of extra responsibility to build a technology that would certainly fail because no one qualified to build it lived within 50 miles. Have you considered being a career kamikaze for our benefit? Come work your butt off for the benefit of clueless entitled people. Forgo the opportunity of the best labor market of our lifetime. You can't miss this. Damn startups, man. I worked for one that went belly up, got sold for parts. A few years later, we got our stock option check. Everyone got $1. Yeah, I've never trusted stock options. The best I've ever done was when a company I worked for was sold and my options immediately vested. Nice chunk of money, but it didn't make up for years of being underpaid. That $1 check is funny. I wonder if everything was legal. Surely they made enough from the sale that your options were worth more than $1. Unless they were extremely stingy, like optimistically creating 10 million options and giving each employee a few hundred. Startups. If you're going to justify low salaries with stock options, at least give out a lot of them. They're completely free to you and they trick gullible employees in their early 20s that they'll make it big if they just live in poverty a few more years. Yes, I realize that pretty much no one who gets stock options lives in poverty. Next story. My husband and I decided to take our child to have some fun at the small trampoline park we have in our city. Now our child is very young but old enough to be allowed inside of the park. It's important to know that there's a small area for smaller children, but all areas of the park are clearly marked with height requirements. Not once did we take our child out of the designated areas for them. One area of the park had these smaller trampolines all next to each other. One cool feature was they had trampolines against the wall so people could really bounce around. One important rule was only one person was allowed per trampoline and you're not allowed to bounce in another person's square. This is important. This park is semi-busy and we picked the far corner of the park to take our child to bounce. My husband is bouncing with our child and I'm just hanging back taking pictures and videos. I have bad knees, I don't do well on trampolines, lol. Here enters the entitled kid. This boy is bouncing around all over the place, screaming and yelling. Yes, it's a trampoline park, but this kid was freaking obnoxious. His mom, EM, was just sitting on a bench playing on her phone and hardly looking at her kid. The boy was constantly going onto others' personal spaces, cutting lines to the fun obstacle courses, and even pushing kids out of his way. I saw an employee try to talk to the EM twice, but the EM just seemed to ignore her. Why she wasn't kicked out then and there, I have no idea. The only reason I ever saw all this was because the boy and his screaming was hard to miss. My husband and child are having a bouncing ball around. My child is laughing and content just to stay in their little trampoline square. My kid didn't even care about bouncing into other squares. Now here's where the EK messed up. The boy begins bouncing around the small trampolines, not looking or caring about anyone else in the area. He cut into several other people's areas, constantly breaking rules. I'm absolutely pissed off. It wasn't my intention to be a Karen about it, but I found an employee and told them that I'm scared for my kid's safety as well as the other kids in the area. Then I heard the screaming. I turned to see my husband trying to comfort our kid who was screaming their head off while huddled on the bottom of his trampoline. The EK was still laughing and bouncing around. I don't even think and rush forward to my kid. I asked what happened and my husband, who is infuriated, tells me EK was bouncing around and my husband asked him to be careful because our child was bouncing in the square next to him. Well, the kid ignored him and jumped right into the same square. My kid went flying into the air and fell hard onto the trampoline. The EK laughed and continued bouncing around. Had our child not been hurt, my husband and I probably would have tried to kill the EK. The employee, also angry, rushed to the EM who was still sitting down and ignoring her own kid. I couldn't hear what the employee initially said, but the EM stood and clearly looked pissed off. EM, why the hell do I have to leave? My son's done nothing wrong. Employee, who is now loud and angry, your kid has been breaking the rules ever since he started bouncing. We should have made you leave earlier, but I was too nice about it, and I tried to give you the chance to parent your kid. Now he has hurt another child. You need to take your son and leave now. The EM looks in our direction, and I'm glaring as my child is still crying in my arms. EM, that kid is too young for this park anyway. Those parents should have never brought them here. Employee, that child is within the height requirements for the park. Enough is enough. Take your son and leave before I call the police. There was a lot more cussing out of the EM, but she ultimately took her, now screaming and crying kid, and left. Unfortunately, our child wasn't really up for bouncing after that, so we decided to leave. We were at the park for less than 30 minutes. The employee did come over to apologize for not making them leave earlier and gave us vouchers for free entry next time we want to come back and bounce. Our child is okay, a couple of bruises but nothing major. McDonald's and ice cream made them feel better, lol. I hope I never see that EM and her kid again, but if I do, I'll probably try to strangle them. Next story. So, I met my boyfriend online in mid-2020 and we bonded very quickly. He lived in an extremely abusive household, and about 7 months after we started talking, he let me know that he did not believe he could physically survive for much longer where he was. His living conditions were truly horrific, and he nearly died of a heat stroke on multiple occasions. I started to feel very frantic, and every day where he was only grew worse and worse, he had nowhere else to stay. I eventually decided, with a heavy weight of dread and disdain around my shoulders, that I had to convince my entitled, narcissistic mother to allow him to stay in our house. I felt mortified that circumstance had forced me into such a situation wherein I was at my mother's mercy. I felt pitiful and obsequious. I had, however, done quite a lot for our family that was unnecessary and even inappropriate for a child to be expected to perform. I realize I am extremely young and most people don't take teenage relationships very seriously for understandable reasons. However, I have bonded with this person on so many levels that I take very seriously, and he and I have consoled one another through strenuous lows and traumas. developing a mental and emotional connection before placing premature stock into a relationship. My mother always tells me that I'm more mature than any adult she knows, typical excuse for a psychological enmeshment, yet she treats me as a child whenever it suits her. My mother ended up permitting him to come here, but not before berating us both over and over and convincing me that my request was dramatically off-putting. She would give many reasons for this, such as that the attic he would sleep in, which over the 16 years we have lived in our house no one has ever wanted to use, could be employed for so many purposes were he not going to occupy it himself. My mother ended up using my helplessness greatly to her advantage, and has since taken it upon herself to mortify me at every chance she gets. During one of such times, my mother decided to announce to my uncle, someone I respect and whose view of me I care about, and to the rest of my family that my boyfriend and I were engaged. My uncle laughed in a way that practically screamed, "Kids are so naive," and vocalized a sort of teasing, "Well, congratulations." I think that ever since then, even since I explained to him that we were not in fact engaged, his respect for me has plummeted. It sounds really meaningless and small, but in that moment, my mother made me feel more uncomfortable and mortified and ridiculed than I have felt in a long time. I think I even cried a little in the bathroom, which is kind of a surprising reaction for me, since I have issues with expressive apathy. I confronted my mother about her inappropriateness later on after she mocked something in my whole family's eyes that mattered to me more than anything. She told me I had no right to confront her when I was putting their lives out so tremendously by asking that my boyfriend stay with us. She proceeded to scream lecture me for a few hours before throwing me out of our house and leaving me alone outside. Sorry for the long post, but I have just been reflecting a lot on 2021 as of late, and that memory somehow really stood out to me. It humiliates me even in retrospect. Edit. My mother doesn't pay for our house nor for any of our expenses. My uncle does. We are all dependent on him. And he has told me many times that he's perfectly happy for my boyfriend to stay with us. It was just socially necessary that I first discussed this with my mother because I knew the type of consequences that would ensue if I bypassed her.